Good evening and welcome to another episode of Chasing Hope with me, your host, Catherine Abraham. Our episode today is highlighting two very important aspects of human life: conscience and its connection to our faith. For those of you who have read the Bible or who have heard stories of the Bible, you would know that there were a distinct set of Jews, namely the Pharisees, who were very prominent in society because they were rich and they had all the money in the world. And apart from that, they would stand in the synagogue and they would pray aloud so that everyone could hear them. And this was not really how God wanted the Jews to pray. In fact, that was not how he wanted anybody to pray. And yet, people went right ahead and did exactly that. What they were trying to manifest at that time was how rich I am, how much I have, how much I want, how holy I am. So the definition of their piety was on the basis of how loud they prayed. All these years later, we may not find too many people praying aloud and making a statement of their faith. But we do see that fundamental principle of conscience dying a slow death. How? Ask yourself the last time you were complicit in some wrongdoing. Maybe you paid a peon an extra $50 so that your meeting would be scheduled as the first meeting of the day with his boss. Think about the last time you professed your faith aloud but went on to do exactly the opposite of whatever you had talked about. Think about the last time you corrected someone else only to commit the same mistake a couple of days, a couple of hours, a couple of weeks later. When we as human beings refuse that still small voice within us, the voice that says, shh, quiet, go out there, fight, don't tolerate injustice. What do? Do we go ahead and listen to that still small voice? Or do we choose the easier way out and remind ourselves that we have a family at home, which may not be safe if we stand for the right? Or do we tell ourselves that we may not be safe if we stand against injustice? Difficult questions, but questions that must be asked. If we say that we are spiritually sound, if we say that we are faithful, if we say that we are connected to whatever manifestation of the divine we believe in. Talking about peace and concomitantly creating violence is a direct contradiction, and one in which many people are innocent and are still shedding their blood. They're still going ahead and suffering without cause. And if you are a part of a group that shares these kind of extreme beliefs, then you've got to really put a check on yourself. Every religion and every faith in this world practices, preaches, propagates non-violence, peace. And yet, in different parts of the country, even today, within India, we see a tiny fight erupting into this entire communal clash, intra-community clash, caste clash. The question is why? And the supplementary question for all those spectators who stand there mute and watch all of these things happening right in front of their eyes without even questioning it once. The question is, why doesn't anyone stand up for the right anymore? Are the scales of justice tilted so badly that we've almost lost our confidence, not just in the system but in ourselves, for questioning what is wrong? We teach children on a daily basis, be honest, practice integrity, stand up for those who are weak. But as adults, are we really becoming the voice of the voiceless? Are we going forward and asking the right questions for those who really cannot ask those questions? Or are we like those Pharisees who stand up and talk a lot about our faith, about connecting with the divine, about how pious we are, but the manifestation of our reality is completely different? We have to ask ourselves these questions today. Whenever I write a piece, and I do so only when I feel completely at a loss, that's when I start writing. And whenever I do, I know that I'm doing the right thing. I remember a couple of years ago when I wrote an article, Humanity is Dead. And I wrote that in response to the killing, the brutal murder of a little child aged 6. She deserved to live. She'd just gone out to play with her friends, and on the way back, some human, some beastly human, picked her up, molested her, and then finally killed her. The outrage lasted days. But here's the thing, even as a society, even as a collective, we did not come up with a permanent solution. Many people I interacted with after writing that article, they said, your piece was really powerful, but we're too scared to share it. And I said, why? If you know I'm saying the right thing, why would you feel scared to share it? And they said, well, because you see, there are authorities who may not like what you just said. You're questioning them. Now, please remember that questioning an authority is not a sin, especially when there are innocent lives at stake. Expecting a fair response is also not a crime. And yet today we find both being rated as crimes. As Christians, one of the fundamental principles that this faith is built on is to fight against injustice. Now, whether that was Moses fighting for the Israelites, whether that was Esther who fought for her people, and whether that was Jesus who picked up the whip in the synagogue to hit all those people who had created a market within the synagogue. Every single biblical character reminds you that you are first and foremost the slave to your conscience. And it is only when your conscience is alive that you will not just indulge in armchair activism, as they call it these days. You'll go out there. You'll deliver the right questions. You'll help the right people. You'll become the voice for the voiceless. If Esther wanted, she could have just lived a royal life. She had everything. She was a queen. She was an orphan. She was someone who hadn't ever seen the riches of a palace. And now she had everything. Why go ahead and put your life at risk? And yet she did. We hear multiple stories of rags to riches. But what about Moses, whose life was one that was riches to rags? He grew up in a palace, only to abandon it for a wilderness. Confused, he kept continuing to move along with all of these frustrated Jews for 40 years. And finally, he did not even get a chance to step into the promised land. And yet, he did the right thing. Abraham, who didn't question God at all. If he wanted, he could have just said, well, God, you've done everything for me. You've given me a family. You've given me everything. Now I'm just going to go. I'm going to just relax. I have everything I absolutely need. But he didn't. He neither questioned God, nor did he go ahead and refuse to believe in God and his providence. And so he went. He left everything and he went where God took him. The truth is, today, if you stand for the right, you might find yourself in the minority. You might find yourself as a solitary reaper, a single soul speaking up. But here's a promise. You're never alone. God is with you. And for someone who has God behind him or her, who really do we have to fear? In fact, even the Bible says, if God is for it, who can be against you? And so, do we really need that support system? Do we really need to be the goody-goody people? Or do we need to be the people who are forthright, straightforward, and honest to ourselves, slaves to our conscience, and honest to our faith? If we can do all of these things, my friends, we're already spiritually sound. We're already accepting the faith the right way. I'm not going to give you this false hope that everything's going to be right. I'm not going to tell you that when you stand up against injustice, you will not face problems. Why? Even Christ faced it. He was betrayed by his own friends. And while one may have betrayed him outright, the others weren't far behind. Peter hid. He denied Christ thrice. Imagine the same Peter who was once Christ's right hand. and yet he faltered. But here's the thing, while all of them may have faltered, they were also slaves to their conscience because they went back and asked for forgiveness. All but Judas, who was so deep in guilt that he committed suicide. When we as Christians expect our faith to be manifested in front of people outside of our faith, outside of our communities, we've got to stand there. We've got to be those solitary reapers. We have to be the voice of those voiceless people who we come in contact with. Otherwise, we really do not qualify as Christians. So if you feel that you've been complacent in the recent past, you've just been going forward, going with the wave, as they say. If you've been doing this at work, at your school, at college, at home, if you haven't been standing for the right, please start today. It's never too late. It's never too late. Go forward. Make your voice heard. It's only then that we are blessed beyond measure. I keep telling this to friends, to family, that I may have lost a lot in 2020, but the one thing I still hold on to is my faith and my conscience, both of which I have never betrayed and both of which I will never betray. And I hope that this particular episode inspires you to do exactly the same thing. Because remember, when you stay quiet, despite knowing that everything around you is wrong, you become a part of the problem. So don't be a mute spectator. Don't just stand on the sidelines. Be there, be present, be the voice, be the change. If you've enjoyed this episode, I look forward to hearing from you on email. Go forward. Check out our website www.chasinghopewithkatherine.com for our previous episodes, and if there's any particular part of the faith that you'd like me to highlight in subsequent episodes, please let me know. I'd be delighted to hear from you. And yes, if you have any prayer requests in specifics, please email us and we'll make sure that someone gets in touch with you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a blessed week ahead.